Hello, I'm Julia Kirby, Senior Editor at Harvard Business Review. Our guest today is Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, Harvard Business School professor and author of the new HBR article, Transforming Giants. Rosabeth, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Okay, our goal today is to help our audience understand some of the unexpected findings you've made wandering around the world's largest companies over the last few years. How they are becoming more agile and more creative and more rewarding places to work. Let's start just with that great title, Transforming Giants. Who are we talking about here?
Well, this is an aspiration. I mean, these are companies that would like to make the world a better place. Companies like IBM, Procter & Gamble, General Electric in the United States, Omron in Japan, Cemex in Mexico, Banco Real in Brazil, Diageo and Nokia in Europe. I was looking all over the world for companies that pride themselves on being great corporate citizens, but are using that sense of changing the world to change their own internal practices, and they're making money in the process.
Can you give us some examples?
There's some wonderful things. First of all, Banco Real in Brazil put at the center of its mission social and environmental responsibility, and was one of the first companies to start carbon trading credits and environmentally sensitive products, such as car loans for refitting your car so that it ran on electricity, not gas. So a very pioneering bank. IBM did some amazing things. Had a breakthrough in a new computing technology, grid computing, which ties together lots of personal computers. So they demonstrated this first, not by trying to sell it in the marketplace, but by creating a nonprofit called World Community Grid, where people could donate unused computing power from their PC at home or in the office, and it could be run on huge scientific projects to cure cancer or understand AIDS or work on heart disease. And I then see employees of IBM running World Community Grid in their office with such pride. And even a company like Diageo, which is in alcoholic beverages, has created a beer that by using clean water and regulated technology has actually helped reduce the rates of river blindness in Kenya, in Africa. So amazing, just out of the core products and services, companies are helping transform the countries and the world.
Well, what's the nature of the transformation? What are you seeing that's really different?
Well, you know, we've been talking about these things for many decades leading up to this, but these companies seem to manage in a different way. They have values at the center. They have standardized processes and systems that help them operate consistently all over the world, but those are driven by core values and principles that have at their heart the idea that they must innovate on behalf of the world, that is, solve problems, not simply for their customers, but for communities and countries. And that is also a stimulus to create new products and services that are good for the business.
So in the article, this is something you refer to as a whole new guidance system that's driving these companies. Can you give us an example or maybe a couple of examples of how that looks in companies?
Well, instead of managing themselves by rules or by hierarchy, everything has to go at Procter & Gamble to Cincinnati. Well, Cincinnati is still very involved, but people out in the field look at that statement of purpose, values, and principles. They call it their PVP, and they use it to guide their decisions. They think it's giving them a roadmap. It really isn't. It's giving them the power, the autonomy to look in their local markets to see where they can do things that are consistent with that PVP. They innovate, and then they push back at corporate. So it's helping companies be less central and yet be consistent. It's helping them be less bureaucratic and still have people that are aligned in a particular direction. It's helping them be a coherent, coordinated team that's almost self-organized by people in the field themselves who reach out to other people who share their vision of how to operate on company values.
Wow, that's a lot of different compromises sort of being broken by these companies. This is an article mainly about large companies, but is this something that smaller companies can benefit from, understanding how these large companies have been transforming themselves?
Well, in some ways it's easier for smaller companies. IBM, in order to arrive at its new values, had to get over 300,000 people in a chat session on the web. A smaller company doesn't have to deal with such enormous numbers, but they also can put values at the center, because it isn't just values, it's defining the purpose of the business in a way that triggers innovation, because there are always problems out there to be solved, and let's use our resources and technologies to solve them. Smaller businesses often have that at the center, but secondly, smaller businesses can learn from the teamwork and collaboration. You don't have to be more than 12 people before you start having silos and infighting and negativity. So small businesses can learn about what builds teamwork. What builds teamwork? It starts with common purpose. It starts with flexible organization structure so that people can combine with anybody they need to for the task, whether full-time, part-time, long-term, short-term. Cemex does that when they send teams for merger integration abroad. Every manager trains replacements, so there's somebody in place, then the managers go off, some for 2 months, some for 6 months, some for 2 years, but everybody understands the situation the same way because of common purpose, and they know how to operate as a team and fill in for each other. I think small business can flourish. And then finally, small businesses are often partners with these large companies. Small businesses should find out what the large companies to whom they sell or from whom they buy are standing for, because employees of those small companies too would love to be engaged in big world-changing projects, and you can often do it through your connections with IBM or GE or Procter & Gamble.
You just mentioned employees loving to be engaged, and that's a nice way to lead into a talent management question. Let's talk about the implications for individuals within these companies. Is there something about a transforming giant that's better able to attract the best talent?
Well, they can not only attract them, but they motivate them, they keep them, and they keep them even after they lose them, because the alumni associations of these companies are a much bigger force. These are really extended families now. We used to think of these giants as bureaucracies, as sort of rigid, impersonal instruments. They're now an extended family. And IBM recently, for example, has begun gathering their alums. It used to be you were either an IBMer or you were retired, and anybody else was disloyal. Now they are gathering people who formerly worked with the company, often in positions of influence, and because they really care about the things the company stands for, they're an asset as alumni. So you can attract people at the beginning, you can bring them back into the family later, and they're very motivated on the job. When I was traveling around the world doing these 375 interviews, I would see people proudly pointing to the local manifestations of some global contributions their companies had made, and that was often the first thing they talked about. And these were people who were in high demand. They could have gone anywhere. They weren't necessarily even paid the highest salaries in the industry. In India, that's true. There's a hot market for IT talent. But some of these giants, in one company they said, you know, we don't have to pay as much because of the reputational value and social value people get, and also the teamwork. It's a lot more pleasant to go to work every day if you feel you're all pulling in the same direction than in a competitive, cutthroat environment.
Thank you very much for sharing these thoughts. It's a great article, and this was a fun conversation.
Thank you, Julia. My pleasure.